Sometimes there are stories that are in our show prep, and we include them because spider senses tell me something's not right. And there's been a couple of stories in our morning show prep that if you get it at glennbeck.com, it's free. You get all the stories, but you'll be able to see a pattern in the way we work as a team. There are two stories about Jill Biden that bothered me, and I never talked about them on the air because I couldn't figure them out yet. But I had a feeling about a year ago that Joe Biden isn't making the decisions on whether to run or not. It was Jill. Now, there's a couple of things. First, let me go to a story from Politico. How Jill Biden helped Joe to get to yes on running for re-election at 80. She's the not-so-secret weapon behind her husband, and unlike 4 years ago, she doesn't have reservations before he chose to run. Privately, the First Lady encouraged her husband to run again while giving him the space he needed to process the decision in the way he traditionally does, with extensive deliberations, consideration of the burden it would place on his family, and a bit of classic Biden hemming and hawing. She was involved in the high-level discussions around the decision, giving counsel when she felt it was necessary. She's usually in the room when senior campaign staff is presenting strategy to her husband. She'll ask questions, but she never weighs in on the decision, said a former senior Biden advisor. Her gentle encouragement of her husband's re-election run comes as she's relishing her role, hanging out at the Super Bowl or the Women's Final Four, and actively posting on social media. Unlike the cliche applied to wives of major political figures that they're the secret weapon behind their husband's success, there is nothing secret about the role she is playing. Nearly a dozen aides and advisors in Biden world describe the First Lady as someone who has grown more willing to endure the rigors and demands of being in the political spotlight herself and more convinced of her husband's ability to be fit for the job. Interesting line. When I read that, I was, that's a weird line to just throw in. Close advisor says she feels a comfort level with her role inside the White House, balancing the ceremonial responsibilities. Now, why are they making this? Why are they making throwing in his decision to run, and that she is feeling more comfortable at the White House? That she also is really enjoying kind of the power things that you get to do in Washington. And it goes on to talk about she's always there taking notes, listening with her glasses on, and Joe will always look at her and go, "What do you think?" And she advises him. Now, that is contradicted in the same story, and it's just a confusing mess. I read another story about a year ago that was talking about how Jill was the force behind the Biden run this time around, that she was the one driving it. Okay. Then there was this story that just came out from Slate last week or maybe earlier this week. What's happening with Jill Biden? June has turned out unlike how the Bidens expected, dominated by a much bleaker circumstance, namely Hunter Biden's federal trial and conviction. Some of that could not have been foreseen. Jill Biden, as a intensely private first lady, exercised her near perfect control over her image during her 3.5 years in the White House. However, that has cracked. When she appeared at Hunter's trial this month, she faced exactly the same sort of scrutiny and unpredictable headlines that she sought to avoid. Her communications director reacted defensively to questions about this, saying, "She's a mom. Of course she would be there as much as possible to support him." The spokesperson said at one point, and it was hard to argue with that, even as ABC News began reporting the steep cost to the taxpayers of her trips to the courthouse. Now, when's the last time, unless it was Melania Trump, when was the last time you heard about the First Lady's expense? Remember how they They threw just flower petals at the feet of Michelle Obama, and she could spend a fortune and nobody ever said anything about it. In fact, you were called a racist if you did say something about it. Jill was more in her element a few weeks ago, appearing on Good Morning America and The View. By the way, both ABC. It was ostensibly to promote her book. These were actually campaign appearances, and awkward ones at that. But they were nothing compared to the book she was promoting, Willow, which I have not been able to quite shake from my mind since peering through a digital copy this month, as admittedly more consequential events played out. The juxtaposition of poor Willow the cat against all else that has happened in June feels like a telling example of the Biden's larger comms trouble and tendency to assume that benevolent gaslighting might be a viable solution for dealing with them. So here's Slate magazine. They start out about her appearance at Hunter Biden's trial, and that she blew her, cracked that shell of just I'm the perfect first lady. Then they went into she's spending a lot of money, and then they go into this bizarre review of this book she was hawking about Willow the cat. And they go as far as saying it might be good news for Jill Biden that no one is paying attention to this book. It could go on. But here's what bothered me on these stories. And this is why they were included in the show prep, and I didn't know why exactly. The left does not go after the First Lady. And it wasn't a universal thing. It was here and there. In this story, you find out that there were 3 occasions that it was just ABC News. I believe that Jill Biden was the driving force behind Joe making this decision to run again. And that there were people in the White House and people in the Democratic Party that knew that was going to be a disaster. And they couldn't come out and say anything. It wasn't like Edith Wilson, because this is what happened. The Democratic Party under Woodrow Wilson, he had a stroke. Edith ran the White House, ran everything, put a pin in his hand, and then signed his name to documents and everything else. And he was going to run for a 3rd term. Well, nobody saw the president. She wouldn't let anybody in. And finally, the Congress, the Democrats got together and said, we demand we see him, or we're going to bring up hearings, and he will have to appear. So they did. She had registered him for a 3rd term after the stroke. And the Democrats finally had to come to her and threaten her and say, we're going to expose all of this, or you can go away peacefully in the night. I'm not saying that Jill was, faking his signature or anything like that, but she was the one that was getting in the way of getting him to step down, because there were Democrats, screw the country, didn't think that he should run for president again. I think last night happened because that same force that has been throwing her under the bus, the same forces said, put him in now while we still have a chance. Let's do a debate early. And they sold it, and they bought it, and they did it. And what happened last night? Jill Biden was the first one to step up as soon as let me just show you the walking off the stage. Who was the one walking? He was stuck. Donald Trump left the stage. And this is just a shot from people in the room. This wasn't what was on TV. Show that videotape
President
of
Trump
him
walking off the stage
There you
The
go.
first debate of the 2024 campaign and the earliest presidential
So he just
debate
walks
ever
off.
Now in the books and in front of
And
the voters. Tonight,
Joe
along with
Biden
Jennifer
is
Ness,
just
Coach
standing
Florida, what
there,
those voters might make of it from our
and
political professionals from our CNN flash
Jill
poll
comes
and
out
swing state
and
focus
grabs
group.
his arm and
We'll be
stands
talking
there
to
for a
surrogates
while
of
and
Vice
then
President Harris, getting fact checks
walks
from our
him
Daniel Carroll,
down
reporting
with
from
his
the executive
arm
campaign.
down the
Here's
stairs
CNN
of the
commentator
stage.
Scott Jen-
Then they go back into the spin room, and here's what she says when they go back in public. Listen to this.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the... And let me ask the crowd,
And look at him.
What did Trump do? Why?
Then she went to Waffle Hut or Waffle House. She goes to Waffle House, and she's running a little dog and pony show where Joe is just kind of, still looks like he was hit by a freight train. And she's spinning this whole thing and leading a show at a Waffle House. The hell is going on there? I think this was a Democratic inside job to get her to have so much pressure, not him, her, to feel the pressure that he has got to go. Could be wrong, but I bet I'm not.